Okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mike Shea again. Pardon the echo. I've moved into a new office and haven't soundproofed it yet. I'm here with Lisa Khan of Lisa Kruger Khan Immigration, and we're going to go through some changes, some positive changes apparently that have happened of late. The last time we talked was what, a month ago?
Probably so.
And there was that email you sent me at 10 o'clock at night going, oops, we got a problem,
Yeah.
which was the national interest exception being suspended, right?
Yeah. So it's interesting. It was, I think, March 2nd. So what are we in now? April, well, a little over a month. March 2nd, they made, the US government made changes to the national interest exception. The national interest exception being an exception to the travel ban that's in effect right now for the UK, the Schengen area countries, Brazil, I believe China and South Africa. And it had been the case, since we handle a lot of investor visa, E2 investor visa cases prior to this March 2nd change, the national interest exception was pretty much being rubber stamped and just granted for E2 investors because of the importance of of having E2 investors here investing in the US, creating jobs, etc. And what was happening at the embassies, they would just kind of pretty much grant that national interest exception without really having to make a case for it. Then we got this notification in early March that they were changing the criteria, and it was fairly alarming. And I'll read a little bit from it just to recap, and then we'll go through what's happening now. Investors, including e-visa holders and applicants who were previously able to qualify for national interest exception by showing that they would generate substantial economic impact, will now be required to show that they meet the new standards. And it was, deemed to be likely that fewer e-visa applicants would qualify. The new standards entailed showing that an E2 investor was going to provide vital support of critical infrastructure or directly support creation or retention of US jobs. And then they defined what the critical infrastructure industries were, which for many of what we see for smaller businesses didn't seem to fit the bill. Energy sector, financial services, food and agricultural, government, facilities, that kind of thing. And the travel must be in support of that, or the travel has to directly support or retain jobs, and kind of a case by case. So we thought, oh no, this is going to make it really tough. What I'm seeing though in practice, at least with the London embassy, is that they're still granting that national interest exception without us having to really make an argument that the client meets the criteria under this new exemption. I don't know if they're just saying, hey, jobs are being created. This is in support of job creation or job retention. Good enough for us. Let's go ahead and grant it. But we had, for a good example, we had a fellow who went Friday to the London embassy. The investment was into a bed and breakfast in the Midwest, kind of a lakeside bed and breakfast, like an inn. A nice one. I think the investment was maybe $400,000 or $500,000 or so, in that ballpark. But not really critical infrastructure or those sectors that seem to be, a little bit more, along the lines of national importance, I guess. And they approved the visa, had no issues with the visa on Friday. And much like before with the national interest exception, they said, okay, we're approving the visa, but our unit doesn't grant the exception. So we're going to hold your passports, go home. Don't pay the visa issuance fee like you used to right on the spot, because we need to get that national interest exception first. Then you pay the issuance fee. He went Friday. Yesterday was Tuesday. We got an email from the embassy saying, okay, go ahead and pay the issuance fee. You can come in person tomorrow to the embassy, or Friday, or you can pay at the courier service. So they're going down tomorrow to pay the 105 issuance fee, which seems a little silly. I go in person to the embassy and just pay that 105 times 2 because it's a husband and wife. Once they pay that tomorrow, then the embassy is going to be able to process the visa, and hopefully they get the visa, I would imagine, early next week, or the passport back with the visa. And that national interest exception is usually granted for 30 days, one-time entry from the date of the interview. So it's a little tight, because if the interview was Friday, which was I forgot the date, like the 15th or something like that, they'll get it, good for a month. They're hoping to leave the UK end of April, and so they don't have a problem getting over here, but it's only good for 30 days. But the bottom line is, March 2nd, when we saw that the criteria were changing, the fear was, oh, great, they're not going to be issuing this exemption for many people anymore, or we're really going to have to fight for it or try to make an argument and it's going to be tough to get. And are we going to get them, or does this mean the end of the E2s? And thus far, and it's still new. So, it's we've only got another case that's coming up now. It was kind of business as usual with nothing unusual that we needed to do, at least in London, as far as getting the exception.
So,
And this wasn't a particularly compelling business that really, was creating manufacturing jobs, or certainly nothing related to, vaccinations or whatnot. So it's a bed and breakfast in a, in a resort community.
yeah, I mean, you would think, well, so a couple questions. When did that applicant submit their initial?
Okay, so the timeline, so this is like the question I'm getting a lot from my clients that have pending cases, and I'd be happy to kind of share what I've got going right now with what's happening. So his application had been submitted October 30th. The embassy completed review January 6th. No, I'm sorry, is this right? Yeah, I'm sorry. October 9th, we submitted the application. We got an invitation from the embassy end of January of this year to go ahead and schedule an interview. When we go into the system and schedule an interview, they're all still showing as August. We just snag an August interview date. Then we email the embassy and ask for an expedite. When we emailed and asked for the expedite, and to coincide with their timing, we got a date of April 16th. That was last Friday. So we went April 16th. 3 days later, business days later, the 19th, they said, okay, national interest exception's been cleared since your visa interview Friday, pay the 105 fee. They're going to go on the 21st to pay the fee, and then hopefully the visa issued, some days later.
So it's 6 months,
So I'd say it's about 6 months, that between when we filed and when we heard back and when they got the interview, it was a little longer gap there for the interview. We have another case we filed November 2nd, and that's a renewal. They finished reviewing it March 26th. So that was about November, December, January, February, March, 5 months, roughly, a little over 5 months. They haven't scheduled their appointment yet. They're on the fence. Do they want to go in August, or they want to bump it up because they're here running their business and they're not so sure how much time they want to be gone. So that we haven't scheduled the appointment. Another new E2 we filed November 5th. We heard back that they finished the review April 14th. So that was, again, about 5 months, right? My math is right. November, December, January, February, March, April 14th, real close to 5 months. And we scheduled that one for May 4th. So we got that interview within 3 weeks. So that's my next one coming up, May 4th. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that's a investment into a property management business. I'll have to double check. I still have a case, new E2 pending from November 17th. So that should be the next one to hear on. And then, several from December, January, February this year. So they seem to be working on sometime around between November 5th and 17th filings at the moment. And now we're in mid-April. So yeah, I'd say 5 months, and then maybe another month to get an interview.
Is the embassy, are we hearing that the embassy's throwing extra staff at it, or they're just kind of getting through it as they get through it?
Haven't been hearing anything about extra staff. Haven't been hearing anything, somebody says, oh, why can't they do these interviews by video conference? And, that's not going to happen. I had some interesting statistics from the State Department, actually, which you might, I think they're just very interesting. They said before COVID, the State Department issued approximately 10 million visas every year, and over 500,000 were immigrant visas, while the rest were short-term non-immigrant visas. So it's 9.5 million non-immigrant visas issued worldwide in a normal year, which is crazy numbers.
Yeah.
And there's a real backlog right now with the immigrant visas, which is the green card visas. And we don't really need to go over those figures there for the immigrant visas, but they're really backlogged.
Have we got any data on Canada? Because I know I've got a
Canada's still I haven't had any luck getting anything before August as far as an appointment goes. They'll review fairly quickly. I feel like they're reviewing the E2s in a couple months. And they've been pretty good about 8 weeks or so, but I haven't been able to get an interview before August, even for cases filed last fall.
Anecdotally, Canada seems to be more draconian in their shutdown. Like they're still in heavy
Yeah.
lockdown. And
Yes.
yet Britain has, seems to be releasing and opening up more. So it's
Right.
clearly driven by the case count.
Yeah, a lot of, and so much depends right now what's happening in the country, in the area of the consulate, and even a little bit of the consulate's attitude, because what they're doing in London might not be quite the same as another embassy that may be under a directive to be a little bit more stringent with the national interest exceptions.
What's driving that?
I don't know. I mean, I just think that you do see, you always see some standards or some adjudication standard shifts embassy to embassy, and it should be pretty standard all the way around, but there are some embassies that I think are just a little more liberal in their adjudications, a little bit easier to get things through, and some that are just tough, and it sort of depends on who's in charge or maybe the volume, some things like that.
So what
We've had some
the,
cases, especially like for a renewal where a business is a little bit shaky, that I think, we had, I think, was it maybe, I hate to say, in Belgium or something, pretty smooth sailing on a renewal, some things that would go through maybe in a country, in a certain European country, that may not go through in another.
yeah, like Spain's notoriously problematic. And then France is shut down completely, right? They're not doing interviews.
No, I think they're doing interviews now.
They had shut down when the NIE announcement had come out. They just said, well, we can't.
They had just said, we're applying these rules, so we don't know, how many of these we're gonna be able to grant anymore.
But there was no announcement about like a reopening. They just, hey, here's the rules. And then the individual embassies, there wasn't like a second issuance of documentation from the State Department stating, okay, the policy order issued on the 2nd is no longer in effect. They're just.
No, I mean, I think it's still in effect. I think it's just a matter of interpretation.
Glad to
Yeah.
see they're consistent.
Yeah, no, I know. Well, not always, that's for sure.
So the net advice to applicants is what we've been talking about since the beginning of this insanity, was you might as well submit it. And
Yeah, first in, first out. So certainly the people that got theirs in November are in a better spot now than somebody who submitted last month.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Back in 2000, what was it? 5 and 6, when we had that little craziness going on at the London embassy, where they were just
really
bizarre,
slow.
whatever her name
Yeah.
was, she who shall not be named, who was just, denying things. We haven't seen any policy change with regard to what they're approving and what they're denying, right?
No, I haven't seen any trends where there's an increase in denials, or they're making the visas harder to get. I think the only thing that's made everything harder is just COVID, and the embassies not being able to operate at the level that they were before, and limited numbers of appointments, less people able to be in the embassy on particular days. That's just the waiting times, and it's really all driven by the world having changed so much last year.
Right
And
now,
a lot of it, local conditions, country conditions, area conditions. I don't think the embassies in Brazil are hardly open except for emergency services. So, people applying for visas there, different ball game than other countries.
yeah, I've
Travel
seen,
bans have made things a little more complicated.
yeah,
Yeah,
I've
so-
seen a rash of. Everybody's calling me at 5 o'clock. I'm seeing rashes of, or not a rash, but I'm seeing more discussion about change of status again, where
Okay.
people are trying to work around the timeline because the sellers.
Yeah.
The sellers.
We've had to do that, where we filed an application last fall in Toronto for an E2. 2 months later, they'd reviewed it, but said you can't come till August. The guy's got to be here. So he ended up coming in. We've got an appointment for August, but he ended up coming in early this year under a visitor stay. And after, a month or so passed, he said, I really can't go back and wait 8 more months or 7 more months. So we filed with immigration, a second filing, an E2 petition, and asked them to approve the E2 and change his status. So we did that. We were able to premium process another $2,500, but a 2-week decision. So we got that approval, and it's expensive for him, but at least he says, okay, at least I'm in E2 status. I can get a social security number. I can be here. I can work my business, which is a new business, and I'm good until August. And then I'll go hopefully go get my visa, be there for a couple of weeks, and then come back in and have the ability to travel in and out. The problem with the change of status is people say, well, I'm landlocked, and you're never really landlocked, but you can't leave and come back in unless you've got the visa in hand.
Right. And that's probably been some of the stuff I've had to explain to people within the confines of what I can explain. But because of the limited inventory and the uncertainty, the sellers are pushing back on these 6 months.
Sure.
We probably need to explain change of status. It's something buyers may have to consider.
Yeah.
Sellers aren't going to be able to wait 6, 7, and you can understand why 6, 7 months. That's what caused that to spike as a path back in 5 and 6 was the unknown duration of this, and then we got back to normal, and it was 90 days. We could
right.
And now we're back at I don't know when, right? And
exactly. And it's tough to tell a seller, hey, we submitted our visa application. We're hopeful to get an interview in 6 months' time. And thanks for taking your business off the market. And that's not easy. So where sellers, when it's a hot business or there's more people lined up, it may be that somebody's got to do a change of status to be
able to explain that real quick, what the change of status is?
Yeah, so a change of status is only available if you have entered the country pursuant to a visa entry. So somebody may have entered on a B1, B2 visitor visa or an F1 student visa. Exception is Canada, because Canada, you don't really get a visitor visa. You can come in and be admitted for 6 months. But if someone's come in other than the ESTA, the visa waiver program, where you can only come in for 90 days, if you've come in, let's say as a visitor, B1, B2 business visitor, maybe been admitted for 6 months, then you can file with immigration here in the US an E2 petition and request a change of status. And with an approval, you'll be switched over from a visitor to an E2. If you file within the first 30 days of entry, it's a problem because you can't come in on a Monday saying to the folks at Customs and Border Protection, hey, I'm here to visit. And 3 days later, well, now I decided I'm an investor and I've got a contract from a month ago, because that's a bit of a conflict of what you had represented at the border. Right. So a lot can change. And really for the fellow that, from Canada that had already filed the E2, was getting this business going, he said, I got to come over as a visitor. I'm not going to work in it, but I got to make sure it's a new restaurant. I got to make sure that the build out's happening. Once he was here, and after a month, he said, can we file so I can just stay and I don't have to go back, and I can feel comfortable to work in the business and go on the payroll and do what I need to do. And so that was a good, it's a good scenario for doing a change of status.
We processed that through what, Dallas?
It depends on, I think all the E2s right now are in the California Service Center. Okay. The nice thing about those is you can fast track the adjudication for a premium processing fee of $2,500. It's an optional fee, so you don't have to go that route. Otherwise, it might be like 3 to 4 months for an adjudication. But a lot of people like to pay that premium processing for the peace of mind, or to, the sellers like that too. The downside with the change of status is that when you get that approval notice and you're switched over to an E2 from the date of the approval, it really only is good while you stay in the US. So if you're here for the next 2 years working in your E2 status, that's great. But if you leave the country, you've left the change of status behind here in the US, and then you've got to get a visa from the embassy in order to return as an E2. Right. So if somebody has a need to travel frequently, has a business overseas, family overseas, elderly parents, and they need to come and go freely, it's going to be restrictive to do the change of status, because the minute they go, that was the end of that. Right. They got to plan those contingencies. Like you and I both know someone who's been here for 15 years on a change of status. Yeah, I have got clients that every 2 years we file for another 2 years and another 2 years and another 2 years. And it's like, and if you add all that up, it's like, why don't you just go do the E, right? Some of the folks, I think, either don't need to travel, don't want to travel, don't have ties anymore. Some, I think, are just nervous that it's been so long, and they're just afraid to, it is always a little riskier, I guess, when you've left your business and home behind, and God forbid there's a problem at the embassy. Now they're stuck, overseas. Yeah. Immigration is pretty good too about extending one's stay, even if the business is a little borderline marginal. So there are probably some cases that immigration will extend that maybe the consulate would say, look, you've been here for 10, 12 years and this business is just kind of limping along. I don't think we're going to renew this, or I don't think we're going to give the visa. And that is a worry for a few people.
Yeah.
Immigration here will kind of look at a bigger picture and take into account maybe someone owns a home or has other assets or the spouse has a job. The embassies don't really care too much about that. They're looking at the business.
Yeah. Right.
And that's where, again, you have a little bit of an adjudication standard difference, even though the rules are pretty much the same, but you're talking about, USCIS versus the State Department, and they do things a little differently sometimes.
Yeah, they got different standards, and then it's,
Yeah.
I think the where people get confused is the gray area, and then some of the agenda. You've got some folks who come over in their late 50s and 60s, and we're only planning on staying here 10 years. They did the change of status, and going back, they're going to look at you when you're 70. Whether they should or shouldn't isn't right or wrong. I always go, there's no, it's not right or wrong. It's totally subjective, and they're going to look at you and go, "You're really running a business. Did you really meet the intent that was originally set forth?" And we've seen that where the change of status. You mentioned the contracts written for a month prior when they applied, so you flat out lied when you came in.
Right.
Right.
And immigration will pay attention to that kind of thing. You say, "Oh no, I really intended to visit, and then I changed my mind a month later." Well, yeah, but your contract is 2 months ago, and then oops, okay, found out.
That's the little detail your broker needs to catch when you write the document up.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
It's an interesting little fact, just for whatever it's worth, too. There's 233 non-immigrant visa processing posts around the world, and only 43 of those are processing routine non-immigrant cases, with the majority of them being closed for all but emergency services. So that's kind of interesting. I think the number is really only 18% of consular posts are really kind of doing routine non-immigrant visas like e-visas or maybe H-1B or L.
You know what those are?
I don't know which. I don't. It's a good question. I don't know which those are. Certainly London's one, but there are some embassies that really, like Brazil, they're not doing anything other than emergency type scenarios.
Yeah. So anybody who's probably got a flare up isn't shut down.
Right. I think Pakistan, I don't think and India, I don't think are doing routine non-immigrant visas too. I think some of the countries that are having a harder challenge, maybe population and otherwise, with COVID, are the ones that they're not going to be issuing a lot of visas.
Okay.
And a lot of it's a health issue, I guess, for the United States too. If the U.S. consulate's issuing visas in certain countries where it's risky for those folks to be coming to the U.S. and cause more problems here, it's a balancing act.
All right. So summary is, London seems to be processing as we were pre the announcement on March 2nd.
Yes, which is great for, I think, largely you and I, because in the Central Florida area, we're fortunate to have a lot of British folks and a lot of British clients that, that would like to have E2 visas and invest here. So that's good for, people who work with that clientele.
Right. And then the change of status has appeared to be an option. And if they want information on that, they should reach out to me or you, and then I'll point them to you, and you can explain the subtle nuances of,
Sure.
Yes, it's good. Yes, it's an option. Here's what it costs. And, oh, by the way, there's a little bit of a hiccup. You can't leave or you can, but you can't get back necessarily.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So if someone wants to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Best way is email, and that's lisa@lisavisa.com, or you can go to my website, which is lisavisa.com, and there's a link there.
Okay. Thanks for updating me, and I will be sending out a link on this.